Welcome back to another FromSoft boss analysis. Literally no one asked for this, but I'm really interested in tutorial bosses and how FromSoft in particular uses these tutorial bosses to both teach and test the core mechanics of their games. So today I'm going to discuss two of them, Iudex Gundyr from Dark Souls 3 and Margit from Elden Ring, and how they're perfectly tuned to their respective worlds. Both bosses are easier manifestations of more difficult versions of them that you'll encounter later in their games to test you and to show you how far you've come. And in Dark Souls 3, that's Champion Gundyr, and in Elden Ring, that's Margit. But let's focus on how they differ first. Iudex Gundyr fits the environment in which he exists. He comes very, very early in the game in a clearly demarcated area that the level design inexorably leads you to. Dark Souls 3 has ingenious interconnections in its level design, and there's some flexibility in the order in which you approach the game, but on the whole, it's a fairly linear progression. So Iudex's placement makes a lot of sense. Iudex as a boss has two phases, and I really love that you can approach him in two ways, by parrying and by exclusively dodging. If you go for parrying, he has a limited but nonetheless diverse set of attacks, providing exposure to the imperative to properly time your parries without making it prohibitively difficult, especially if this is your first experience with Dark Souls or the Souls universe. Parrying can be a really difficult skill to learn at first, and this is a really good environment. It's not too challenging, but it does expose you to the initial mechanics that are pretty unique to Souls games. If you choose to dodge in Phase 1, there's plenty for you to learn as well. Iudex utilizes delays, alternating tempos, and jerky body motions, teaching you early on how to read enemy movements and time your dodges. Since it's so early in the game, you can survive this fight with some spam rolling, but not with just spam rolling, which I think is very fair for a tutorial boss. Once you get to a boss like Pontiff Sullivan especially, the game will have expected you to improve on this front, and in that fight, basically any spam rolling at all is almost instant death, but such a punishing boss at the beginning of the game would probably cause virtually all Souls versions to ask for a refund. So this is, I think, a fair and balanced, finely tuned level of difficulty with respect to dodge timing. In Phase 2, Iudex transforms into an abyss monster, providing simultaneous exposure to non-humanoid enemies. Here, you need to learn about body hitboxes and positioning. Iudex can now hit you with his face, tail, and claws, while his weapon continues to be in play, even if it is obscured beneath his bulky body. With Iudex, you can minimize damage by staying in the back, but you can't use this as a consequence-free crutch, as you'll still need to learn to manage his tail movements. All in all, you really do learn about the core mechanics of the game and how they apply to the primary enemy archetypes, all in a fight that I think is a genuinely good time. Now, Margit takes this template and builds on it. I've had a sort of religious awakening with Margit, and I am now his chief evangelist. Beforehand, I never disliked him, but I wouldn't have said that I considered him to be anything particularly stand out. However, doing my no-hit run on him made me engage with him and understand him at a much more granular level, and I've come to think of him as actually uniquely brilliant, perfectly tuned to virtually every aspect of combat in Elden Ring. First, he's situated in a location that doesn't make it immediately clear that he's a tutorial boss, which reflects the customizable open-world format of Elden Ring. Second, the myriad approaches you can use to defeating him also mirror the vibrant spectrum of gameplay styles open to users. Like Gundyr, he's a fantastic boss to hone your parry skills. Parrying, like I said, is not easy for new players, despite what veterans long accustomed to the mechanics might say online. Margit is harder than many early game encounters, but easier than later game ones, a perfect bridge between them. You can learn the basics of parrying earlier on, for example, the Crucible Knight in the Limgrave Everjail, who has very consistent, easy moves to parry, letting you wet your feet there. But Margit will force you to learn how to deal with parries of irregular timing. Assuming you can master even, let's say, a third of his parries, you can get through the fight. If you master all of them, the fight is trivialized completely, a great reward for learning this indispensable skill in Elden Ring. Margit also introduces players to the difference between parryable and unparryable attacks, particularly during his second phase. But it's in a non-parry approach that the genius of his design really shines through. On first glance, he seems almost broken, frankly. Most of the times you attack him will be punished with seemingly random, nearly undodgeable magic dagger attacks. It's like he waits for you to attack and then attacks you right in the middle of it. That's certainly what it seems like at first, and it can be quite frustrating. There's an ostensible randomness to it on the one hand, and deliberate kind of malice to it on the other that can make the path to victory seem extremely opaque at the beginning and even after a fair number of attempts at him. But in reality, this is not the case at all. First, Margit teaches you how and when to roll, but also when not to roll. A considerable portion of this fight is won not through rolling, but through positioning. Margit's going to spam you with rapid attacks if you stand in front of him and attack him in front of him for too long. And, why wouldn't someone do that in a fight if you think about it, right? It actually makes perfect sense. Why should he just stand around and wait for you to attack him? So the first lesson here is to position yourself so that you end your attacks to his side or to his rear, allowing you to dodge the daggers or space yourself out. Second, many of his attacks can be evaded with greater efficacy by strafing rather than dodging. His big charged overhand attack doesn't even require a dodge at all, and you can see me do it in this video. All you have to do really is merely stroll up to his side and wait. And the same is true with his follow-up overhand slam. And the benefit of this is that actually you have more time to counterattack him if you strafe than if you do the same thing when you dodge. And I've experimented with this. So it's really actually inviting you to use strafing and positioning as often as you use dodging, which is a very important skill. It's very easy to just over dodge in these games, and later on that will be deleterious to your success. So it's really cool that he teaches you that here. In phase 2, we learn about the directionality of evasion. Because of invincibility frames, it's often a good idea to roll forward and into attacks, but it's not always a good idea. Margit's 2 sword swipe plus 1 staff hit combo is a great example. Dodging forward will definitely lead to enormous damage. Dodging to the side can be possible, but it's extremely difficult and unreliable, so this is one that's best dealt with just by dodging backwards as opposed to forwards. Overall, Margit is great because he's a metonymy for how you want to play the game. You can beat him by tanking damage, spending most of the time rolling away from him and getting in sporadic hits, using summons, pelting him with consumables, whatever. And that is totally fine. The only imperative that anybody has when playing Elden Ring or any Souls game is to win the game and to have fun doing it. Anyone who disparages you for using magic or using summons is a joyless busybody and should be ignored. But if you want to go for an extremely technical mastery, that's just as legitimate and objective. And if you try hard enough, you can do that with Margit, and that is when the true brilliance of his design really shines through.